Welcome to the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love, and on this episode, we're going to talk to Dan and Dawn Willliams. They are co-hosts from the Erotic Awakening podcast, in which they educate their audience on all types of things erotic. They are a master-slave couple and have been that way since 2001. They've presented at over 100 events around North America, and they are also authors of the book Living MS, a book for masters, slaves, and their relationships. Dawn and Dan and Dawn, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is
Absolutely.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you guys on the show. I'm really anxious to learn a lot from you all today, and I'm sure my audience is too. So before we get into your backgrounds, why don't you first educate my audience on the term BDSM and Kink, okay? Are they the same? Are they different? And then about the master-slave relationship that you indicate in your book.
Sure thing. So let's start with BDSM and Kink, and really it is the same thing. It used to be BDSM, which stands for a variety of things depending on who you ask, but basically it comes down to whips and chains and spanking, and a lot of that stuff you've seen in 50 Shades of Grey, which maybe many of your audience members are probably familiar with, at least at some point at this point.
Right.
So whether it means it means that you're involved in some sort of physicality around your intimate relationships. And it can. Sometimes it includes sex. Sometimes it does not. Many of the play parties that we attend does not involve sex at all. It involves using rope for bondage or flogging, or for some people a little more into things. It includes whips. Includes spanking, includes paddling, something that one person does to another, and sometimes they switch and the other person does it to them. It can also include, kink can also include a very, very large umbrella, anything from fetishes, like people that have foot fetishes and shoe fetishes and all kinds of stuff like that. But in general, when we talk about BDSM and kink, it's mainly around things like caning and paddling and flogging and spanking and that sort of thing. Bondages as well.
All right. We're going to get more into that. And now the master-slave relationship.
So the master-slave aspect, that's just a term that we use to describe our power exchange relationship. So that just means that one person has agreed to be in charge and be responsible for the relationship, and another person has agreed to follow. So in this instance, I'm considered the slave, so I'm the follower, and Dan is the master. He's the one that makes the decisions, and he's the leader. So, and it can look different for every relationship, and people use different words. Some people don't like those two descriptor words, so they'll come up with something else, dom, sub, owner, property, whatever works for them. Mm-hmm. So, but basically it's a power exchange. One person leads, one person follows.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm getting it. Okay. So how did you two discover this master-slave relationship for you? You've done this since 2001?
Well, we actually started back in 98.
Okay.
So we started, something happened to where Dan and I had been friends for a long time. And something happened to where we looked at each other's porn collection. And what we found was, and it was just pictures. It wasn't videos and stuff. It was just pictures. And we found that we had some of the same pictures in our collection, and they all seemed to involve somebody dominating somebody else. They didn't even have to be naked pictures. Sometimes they were just of somebody kneeling with a dominant hand wrapped in their hair, and just the look on their face of utter devotion and trust. And, so it started tingling something in me of, I wanted to trust someone that much that I would be utterly devoted to them and want to take care of them.
Okay.
And, but it had the porn aspect too. I mean, we started in the fantasy world. We started with the porn and the play. And it just grew from there. But we developed our relationship. We started out really slow in like 98, and, just making sure this is what we wanted.
And when we got started in that, we started on our own with the idea of the fantasy of, I would order Dawn. I'd say, Dawn, do this sex act. And Dawn would just say, oh, yes, sir. And it would happen for me, right?
Okay.
And we would both find that to be very erotic and very, very much spoke to who we are.
Okay.
But at some point during all this, I would say to Dawn something like, Dawn, get me a peanut butter sandwich. And she would be like, oh, yes, sir. And we realized that spoke to us as well, this idea. And as things continue to grow from there, we built a relationship of, like Dawn said, there's a leader and a follower, somebody who is in charge of the relationship and somebody who implements what the person is in charge says.
Okay.
Now, that certainly doesn't mean that Dawn doesn't get a voice. She has a huge voice, and she's much...
She has a huge voice.
And she's actually... She's smarter than I am in many areas. So, of course, I rely on her in areas where she's smarter. And things like finances, for us, the way it works is we sit down next to each other and we say, well, should we pay this bill? And how much do we have to put aside for the cat's medical insurance and that kind of thing? It was really neat for us as we started to interact with the rest of the community some, we find out that we're not alone out there in this view of power exchange being important. And the terminology around master slave actually comes out of the late 40s, early 50s gay leather culture.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were running around in the modern day version of that, eventually people said, you guys can call yourself dom sub all day long, but the reality is the kind of relationship you have, the terminology that we perceive as being, it makes more sense. It might make more sense to you to try the master slave terminology. And throughout the years, that seemed to have made more sense both for us and other people in the community.
Okay.
Indeed.
All
So,
right.
and Dan says that we do finances next to each other and I have a voice and things like that. But when it comes down to it, he's got final say. So, I can have my voice and share opinions, but he has final say. But I'm okay with that because we've been doing this. Like I said, we started building it at 98, moved in together in 99. And you're right, we were formally collared, which is kind of like a marriage, in 2001. So that's when it became official.
Okay.
So we're coming up on 19 years of doing this. And over that time and time again, he's proved that he can be trusted with having that final say.
Okay.
So it really works for us. It keeps us from having to play games.
Okay.
Of who's in charge and, people argue over this and who's going to be in charge of that. And we just don't have that.
Right. So there's a few things, there's a lot of things going through my mind as you are speaking. I'm trying to keep up with everything. Okay. So first off though, you said you started out really slow in the beginning, and Dawn, it sounds like this kind of came to you first. So Dawn, you immediately figured out though that you were the sub, and that's
Yep.
what you wanted to be is the sub, and that he was going to be the dom. However, are there couples where it's the other way around?
Oh, gender-wise?
Yes, gender-wise. Like, say for
Yes,
instance,
absolutely.
could there be a female who is the dom,
Yeah.
and the male is the sub, or could there be that the female is the dom and the male is the sub during perhaps play, but could they possibly reverse the roles in everyday life, like you're mentioning, Dan, about the fact that Dawn has a say in finances and she's smart and different things like that? So is that possible?
So there are relationships that fit anything you can think of. So one of my best friends is, and I also work with him. He is a male sub, and his wife is the dominant of the relationship, and they are also master slaves. So, and then there are some people that this is only a play thing for them, and those roles are only done in the bedroom.
Right.
So, and then everything else that they do is what we call vanilla, which is basically egalitarian, and how most other people live.
Okay, I get it.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, and it can be female, female, male, male. It can be triads. It can be quadruples. It can be whatever combination you can think of is out there.
Gender wise. Okay. And so here's another question. Is it possible, just because I don't know a lot about this, so I'm trying to find out, is it possible that there's a dom, or no, that's just not going to work because there has to be
Oh,
somebody, or how's that work? Yeah.
mm-mm. That also works. We just went to a meeting Tuesday night, Dan, or something like that, where there is a dom couple,
Wow.
and this happens, but that means that they have to be willing to play with other people, right?
Ah,
So in their household, they're dom, they have to figure out how they're going to communicate so that they're not arguing all the time,
okay.
right?
Right.
So up front, they discuss that. How are they going to handle things so that they can coexist? And then when it comes time to play, not all power kink couples are into kink and play, but this one is. And so they find other partners that will sub for them. So, and be their submissive.
Ah, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to hear a little bit more about this, and perhaps I will as we progress through the show. Okay. So, but at the end of the day, you immediately, Dawn and Dan, figured out what your roles were, and you could see then, what kind of attracted you or fueled you more into this, and then you just kind of built upon it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of fell upon it, and as you do in a new situation, we wandered around a little bit and made some mistakes, but we knew right off the bat that you're right. Yeah, there's never a point where I thought, gee, maybe I should be the submissive, or maybe I should bottom for somebody.
Right, right.
I've tried it. I've tried it on occasion, and it just doesn't do anything
Doesn't
for
fit
me.
you. Yeah, doesn't fit your personality. So, okay, so
Yeah,
now,
just
yeah.
like I don't like to talk. So it just, I don't like it.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so as you were speaking, also, I was thinking, okay, um, Dan said earlier in an example, go and get me a sandwich or whatever. Okay, so I'm thinking just in a uh, vanilla relationship. Is that what you were saying, Dawn? Is that what you
Mm-hmm.
called it?
Yep.
Yeah,
Mainstream,
yeah.
how most people live, we call it vanilla.
Okay, so I would think, there are some vanilla couples, all right, married couples like yourselves, that's fine. Their husband says, "Go get me a sandwich, honey. I'm hungry." Okay, well, and she does it. I mean, I don't
Sure.
see. So there's some similarities, I guess, where I'm getting at. There's some
Mm-hmm.
similarities in vanilla mainstream relationships that are a lot like yours, but then there's a difference. So where does the difference come in at? Really comes in at? Is it because Dawn, you would call Dan sir? Is that it? Or that kind of thing?
That's part of it, but that's not the difference.
Okay,
The
go ahead.
difference is if I say, Dawn, go get me a sandwich, and maybe she's right in the middle of something.
Okay.
Or maybe she says, okay, but then forgets. Or, any situation where I don't end up with a sandwich, there's a price to be paid. And
Oh,
not not a manipulative price, not I'll get you later sort of thing, not I'll yell at you for not doing
Not
it,
a passive aggressive thing.
not a passive aggressive thing. Um, it's normally Dawn, come here and let me explain to you what the problem is, and I expect you to do better. And for me to push her to go do whatever it is. Now, making a sandwich, obviously, that's a silly little example, although it's real, but it's more like that's a situation where I would simply say, Dawn, and I'd bring it to her attention, and I would, let's say quite bluntly, I'd bring her wherever she was. She would now be standing next to me. She would be silent. She would be waiting. And I would explain, I'm in the middle of doing a thing. I told you to get a sandwich. You told me to get me a sandwich. I expect a sandwich. Why is there a problem? And she would respond, sorry, sir. I will go take care of that right away. And she'd go take care of it. End of story. We would
okay.
never bring this up again. It's not something we'll argue about later. It's done. Now, in some of the things, it's more like, Dawn, go learn how to be a clergy, or go to take care of more significant things, more where I do have to pay more attention and push. And I think to me, that's the difference. I've been in vanilla relationships before where I've had a wife and or a partner, and I say, hey, can you grab me a sandwich? And like, yeah, sure. And when they don't do that, I say, hey, I thought you were going to get me a sandwich. Oh, get off your own ass and go get it, lazy. And then for days, I'm still, or they won't say anything, and I'll just go get it. For days, I still think about that. I'm like, God damn it, all I wanted was a darn sandwich, and they blah, blah, blah. We don't have any of that.
Okay.
Everything happens now, and there's a pleasure of service that we both receive.
Okay.
And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that at the beginning of our relationship, we actually talked about all of this and agreed to all of this.
Right.
So we wrote things down. We wrote down needs, wants, desires, expectations, all of this stuff. And we did it as equals before even getting into a power exchange relationship.
So kind of like a contract almost, kind of like a contract.
We absolutely did a contract.
Yeah.
We did a contract as a tool. We wrote it all down when we were in good space and trying to decide who we were as people and what we wanted. And so it's a very much a self-aware tool.
Mm-hmm.
And because sometimes it can be hard for Dan to call me to task if I've forgotten something, because that's not what society does. But I talked about it at the beginning of the relationship of, this is absolutely what I want. I don't want passive aggressive. I don't want games. I want to please you, and I'm going to be upfront about that, but I also want to trust you. And so we discussed all of that, something I never did in my last marriage that was 14 years of playing the game.
Right. So because of that contract, I guess I'm getting to, because what I'm hearing is because of the contract, because of the guidelines, because of your agreement on what you're going to do, then you would not have, Dan, what you said earlier with someone saying, well, get up and go get your own sandwich, because you kind of know what the expectations are. So there's no flipping in and out. Once you're in, you're in, and this is how you're going to conduct yourself in the relationship.
Right. And I would never say that. So my way of thinking has completely changed, which is awesome for me. I wouldn't say that because it would deteriorate our dynamic. And then we're not power exchange anymore. And we both find our power in our power exchange.
Yeah.
Now I want a sandwich. Oh, let's get off the sandwich topic.
Right.
I want a diet over here.
Yeah. Okay. So here it is. So in order for this type of relationship to work well between couples, I'm hearing also there has to be an agreement and everything. But what do you think is the most essential element needed for a couple to successfully be able to live, in this dynamic besides, the contract and guidelines and that? What's another essential element?
Probably, I'm seeing Dan thinking over there, so I'm going to jump in. But I would say trust, transparency, and consistency.
All right. Can you break that down? Yeah.
As in transparency, when Dan and I do anything, we tell each other about it. If I'm feeling something, he can't master me if he doesn't know what's going on in my head and what I'm doing. So I share a lot with him, right? And then he does the same with me just because we have figured out that that's what helps us work as a relationship. And then the trust, for me to be as vulnerable as I am as a slave, I have to be able to trust him completely and that he has our good intentions. You know what I mean? That's what he is making decisions from.
Yes.
He's not making decisions from being selfish, even though he's allowed to. But usually he does that. He makes the best decisions possible with good intent.
Right.
And then consistency. You can't play vanilla one day and jump into power exchange the next day and think things are going to be okay. Our foundation is power exchange with love built on top of that. So that's what we have to work with consistently.
Okay.
So, and it can be hard. We've been doing this for 20 years, so it can be hard.
Wow.
Got anything, Dan?
No, vulnerability was going to be the one that I was going to suggest. That beginning with that contract where you set the sense of here's why we're doing this relationship this way, because it is a choice, right? You don't have to do a power exchange relationship. You can continue to do vanilla relationships. So why did we make this choice? Mm-hmm. Because it is a lot of work on both of our perspectives. I am madly in love with Dawn, and I don't want to see her upset or to feel like she's not being doing a good job of taking care of me. But we figure out for me to take care of Dawn, I have to push. I have to stand her up when it's not good enough. I have to be able to say, I need more. I want more. I can, and to do that in such a way that is appropriate and does benefit her. It takes a lot of work for both of us. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm the master. I get to just lay here and people will serve me sandwiches all day long, right? It's a lot of work on both of our sides. But because we are growth-orientated people, it is the appropriate relationship for us because it focuses us and forces us to continue to grow with people.
Okay. All right. Now, you two travel the country. I mentioned earlier that you educate others on the master-slave dynamic. So tell me about some of the conferences that you speak at and what happens at them.
Well,
I like the parties.
Yeah, we're very fortunate that we do get to travel all around North America teaching. And I don't know if your listeners would be surprised to find this out, but if we didn't have day jobs and all we did was presenting, we could be at a event every single weekend of the month.
And have to make decisions sometimes between events. There's more than one every weekend.
So no matter what state you are listening in, and no matter, there is an event within 100 or 200 miles of you. Well, maybe 300 miles if you're way out there. But
and we're talking big events. We're talking hotel events. We're talking hundreds of people.
Wow.
Yep. So for just as an example, this weekend coming up, there's an event called Winter Wickedness here happens to be here in our hometown of Columbus, Ohio. And that is going to be an event. It's going to be, as Dawn said, they'll take over the entire hotel. There'll be anywhere from 400 to 600 people there. And a lot of what this event is during the daytime is about the classes. There will be a dozen presenters in there teaching people about a variety of things, not just on power exchange relationships like we teach, but also on kink things. Like, so for example, before you swing a flogger at somebody or before you tie somebody up, there's classes on the right way to do it, the way to do it without causing any actual injury, right? The way to do it in a very safe manner. How to negotiate a scene like that in a safe way, right? It's very scary to say, oh yeah, tie me up and then have sex with me. But how do you do that in such a way that your boundaries are still being respected? So there's classes on how to negotiate that. Classes on the different relationship types. Dawn and I will teach about power exchange. Somebody else might teach a polyamory class where it's multiple partners, or somebody else, other variations of that as well. And this event goes on starts on Friday. And it's very similar to how most of the events work. Friday night, you check in, opening ceremonies, you have a play party that night, and that's something to behold as well, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
So
we have a play party that night. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to talk about the fact that, okay, all these people, this sounds like a conference, like I said, I worked for the Girl Scouts at one time, and we had a huge conference where, I'm hearing a lot of similarities. So how do you hear about these conferences? Because it's like, I don't know that I've ever seen anything advertised. Is this something where it's kind of circle, secret society thing? I don't know, where you're in as a membership. Yeah.
Used to be, not so much. You just need to know the platform to go to.
Like, for example, I didn't know that there's Girl Scout conferences. I'm not surprised, but I don't run around in the Girl Scout circle, right? So how would I know? There's softball tournament conferences, I've been told, because I talked to somebody and I was like, oh, I had no clue you guys had conferences. So it's the exact same thing.
Right.
It's just a matter of what circles do you run around in.
Yeah.
A lot of them will post their events to Facebook. A lot of them will post their events to Meetup. And those are the events that you probably want to go to, because they're the ones that they're going to be held in a very professional manner. All the permits, for this Winter Wickedness event, I happen to know the producer of that event.
Okay.
And at some point in the next couple of days before the event kicks off, he'll have both the city police and the city fire marshal come through the event. And he'll say, here's exactly what we're doing at this event.
Okay.
What do you guys need to have happen to make it comfortable, right? So these are not back alley, this is not what we used to picture as these hidden dungeons. These are somewhat public events. Now, I will caveat that with a lot of times people that attend these events have somewhat of a, they're somewhat private about that. I don't know that I want my mom to know what I do on weekends or my coworkers, right?
Okay.
So there's a lot of regard for privacy. There's a lot of regard for when you're in the event space, right? What you see there and what you say there stays there.
Okay. Yeah.
They protect what the location is unless you're registered to go to the event.
Okay.
So there is some acknowledgement of that.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay. Oh. All right. I get it.
So, and I guess I have to mention. Let me mention the website real quick for your listeners. You guys all know Facebook,
right?
Right. Well, there's a very similar website called FetLife. FetLife is Facebook for kinky people, and pretty much anything you think about Facebook, where you've got your main feed and you've got friends and you've got events and groups.
Yeah.
FetLife is the exact same thing, except for it's all focused on kinky people. Yeah.
Okay. And that's where everybody, now that we have the one platform, I forget how long ago that came out, 10 years or something like that. That's where everybody goes to find out about events.
Okay. So say that again. What's the name of it again? I couldn't hear you real good.
It's FetLife, FetLife.
All right. All right. Got it.
Not safe for work.
Not safe for work. Not safe for work. Not safe for work.
Okay. All right.
And once you get in there, we usually lose people for a couple of weeks because they're like, oh my God. And they will rabbit hole for weeks.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you mentioned a little bit about the parties and the play and what happened. So I want to go there now. I want to talk about the parties. I think I've even heard of dungeons and all of that. So I want you to tell me about the parties. I want you to tell me about what a dungeon is like. Do people have dungeons in their home? Just tell me all about it. Yeah.
So, well, we could start with and there's different kinds of parties as well.
Right.
So last night here at the space, we had a spanking party. So literally 70 people showed up because they either want to be spanked, or watch people be spanked. So we set out, we have this huge room. We have a couple of huge rooms here at the space. And one of them is all set up with spanking benches and tables and couches and ottomans and things like that where people can get spanked. In another room, we played icebreaker games so that people could get to know each other and see who wanted to be spanked and who wanted to spank. And it was a whole night of spanking and conversation about spanking, and people were really getting their groove on. So some people are naked, some people aren't. You're going to hear people yelling as they get the heavy whack, and people laughing and just having a great time. So you walk into the room, we have low lighting, we have some groovy music. Groovy, is that still a word? I think so, but it was groovy music.
I get it.
So and it's low red lights, and so it's really an amazing atmosphere. We had so much fun last night. But then you go into big dungeons, right? Which for some places it's a brick and mortar building that's always there. So they paint the walls black, and they have not candles, but things that look like candles on the walls, and dungeon equipment. It's all dark, and some people have that. Here at the space, we have white walls because we also do other things here. So it doesn't always look like a dungeon.
All right. We're going to talk. I was going to say, we're going to talk more about that equipment. But here's a question that I want to ask as you were explaining and kind of describing what's happening. Just like I mentioned earlier, is it possible that someone would be a dom-dom? Is it possible that somebody would want to spank and also want to be spanked? Is that something that happens a lot? Or is
Absolutely.
it just, somebody's like, no, purely not. I'm just wanting to be, spanked, or I just want to spank somebody. How's that work?
Sure. What I do is I set out stickers for a spanking party specifically. This doesn't happen at all parties. But for this party specifically, everybody wears a name tag because it's more social. And I have colored dots. So if you are a top, which means you're looking to spank somebody, you wear a blue dot. If you are wanting to be spanked, you wear a red dot. And if you're up for both sides, you like to do both, then you wear a green dot for go, go, go.
All right.
And the terminology for that is somebody who's a switch. Sometimes they top, sometimes they bottom. And whether it's a spanking party or any other kind of play party, that same terminology applies. I'm a top, I like to give. I'm a bottom, I like to receive. I'm a switch. Ask me, and I might go one way or the other.
Yeah. So we use dots for the spanking party, but a lot of other events like Winter Wickedness coming up, they have wristbands. So
just so you know.
Yeah, just so you know, it's conversation starters,
right,
so that you can meet people.
Okay, so I remember seeing the show 50 Shades of Grey. That is what it was called, right? I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing him, the gentleman in the show, Mr. Grey, hitting the young lady, and I saw all of his equipment and everything. So I want to go into what's used when hitting and kind of talk about some of those things. Can you do that?
Say that last part again for me.
Kind of talk
Our
about
view on hitting. Is that what you said?
not the view, but the types of items that you use. So you mentioned the
Got it.
flogger earlier, and what is
Mhm.
that? Just in case my audience doesn't know.
Cool. So
Yeah. So the equipment, or what we normally what you hear is toys,
Toys.
right? The different toys that we have. And just a real quick on that 50 Shades of Grey is a great topic with people in the community. Some people hate it because it's such a bad representation of the
consensuality.
So whenever anybody brings up 50 Shades of Grey, we like to point out that yes, some of it makes sense. Some of it, like, oh, there's the red room. I've got a red room, and we don't call it that. That's funny sounding, but we have some of that equipment. But the other side of that movie that we are less enthusiastic about is the kink community is so focused and so happy about the idea of consent, that nothing happens without it. It's not just a lack of a no, but it's this enthusiastic yes. That's the thing that's really important, and that was kind of missing from 50 Shades. So I throw that one out there real quick, but
Good.
to get to your actual question, right? So
and it's toys, the toys that are used, the toys.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with.
I'm sitting next to Dan's toy rack in his office, so he's got a lot of toys.
I do have a lot of toys. I'm going to start off on. I'm going to talk about canes. So canes are.
Oh, here we go. Canes. Too bad you don't have visuals. But
yeah,
it's
you can describe it. You can describe it for me.
So canes in general are normally either wood or Lexan or sometimes graphite or metal. Just think of a long rod, kind of it's those sticks that you use for your tomatoes outside, or about half of a fishing pole. Like it's a cane. It's a long stick. And normally has a handle on one side so you can hold on to it, and it is used to strike across the buttocks. And it is, what do you call that, Dawn? Stingy as heck?
Fire, stingy. Yeah. So usually toys are put into two categories, which is stingy or thuddy. And canes would fall more, the thinner they are, the stingier they are. But I also have a category of fire. They're more fire to me. Okay. They're like a lick of fire. So, and you really, with something like canes, you really want to go to classes. These are very lightweight and they're very wicked. They can do damage without much force. So we always recommend people.
What else you got over there, Dawn?
So we have something here called a quirt, which is like a leather slapper that they actually use on horses. You could go to a tack shop and buy a quirt. And again, I call this one fire just because of the way it feels on my back when it strikes. But again, it's used on horses. You can do damage on human skin. So it's something you want to practice with or be taught how to use.
Floggers, you'll probably, likely you've probably seen floggers in medieval movies, in the medieval dungeons, or heck, what is that darned, oh no, that was a cat of nine that they used. Other thing. So floggers, it's normally anywhere from 9 to 18 to more leather balls.
Okay. Yeah,
held by a handle, and it's normally struck across the back.
Right.
Back and buttocks.
So the cat of nine, which you mentioned, basically it's like a flogger. It's just braided leather. So, and then
rope is very popular.
Rope is popular.
Super popular. Just the idea of bondage, and it's its own little thing. It's its own little subculture within the kink culture. You'll hear terms like shibari, which is the Japanese version of rope. I personally am terrible at rope bondage, and I just don't do it.
Okay, so some people use Velcro instead of rope, whatever does the trick.
Okay.
We've got everything from saran wrap here to punching gloves to leather flappers.
Variety of paddles, which, as you can, same thing you would paddle a bad child with, I suppose, in the old days when you were allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Very similar to that, very different shapes and sizes. I see Dawn's got a blindfold there.
Okay.
Yeah, so just all kinds of stuff. And you know what? And if you don't have the money to get this stuff, we also had a pervertible party the other night where people brought in clothespins, wooden spoons, saran wrap.
Just kind of things they've made at home.
Pizza, pizza paddles, shoehorns. So just all kinds of stuff that you can use. This is a response.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So these are the types of things that we would see in the space that you mentioned, or at the dungeon, or those kinds of things. And
dungeon and play spaces are interchangeable terms. In the last 10 years, I think play space has become the normal term. Us old fogies like me and Dawn still think of it as a dungeon.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Play space. All right. Thank you. See, that's why I have you on, because you're educating us on this stuff. All right. So, so what would you have on? Let's talk about attire.
Or not. That is usually the biggest question that we are asked by anybody that's new that's coming to a party.
Yeah. What
should I wear? And I have to tell them, unless there's a theme or unless there's a requirement, because some people will have like a leather and Levi's requirement that you have to wear denim or leather. That's from the old, the old gay community. But usually people wear anything from pajamas to nighties to corsets to leather to jeans to nothing at all. So, last night for the spanking party, we had a couple people wearing tight skirts with their butt cheeks cut out.
Okay.
Other people, there was a guy in a business suit. So we had everything from a business suit to butt cheeks cut out to naked running around to whatever people feel comfortable or sexy in. That's what they wear.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yep. Across the board. You just want to you want to wear something that is going to make you feel, like I said, either comfortable in
the right mood.
In the right mood or confident.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm again, there's so much going through my head right now, but well, okay. So I'm thinking about the items that you mentioned. Excuse me. The flogger and the paddles and all of these things, the cane and this. And immediately I'm thinking, all right, even somebody who likes to be hit, there's probably going to be a threshold there. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm thinking that there must be an importance for communication and the system to communicate when that threshold has been reached. So can you talk about that? Because sometimes, I guess, I'm hearing that you mentioned, I think, Dan, blindfolds, and I don't know, is there something that could be over the person's mouth? I mean, how in the world are they communicating when they've reached their threshold? Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that work?
As I am negotiating with somebody to play, I'm saying, all right, so we're going to do this scene, we're going to do that scene. Maybe we're just going to do a flogging tonight. And one of the things that will negotiate, one of the things we'll set up is the safe words. Now, almost every play space in America and North America uses the safe words that are red, yellow, and green. And red is the universal safe word that the bottom would say to say, look, this is not working. I need you to stop. Something is not happening for me here.
I'm just done.
Yeah. It may well be a matter of they have a cramp in their leg, or it may be that they thought it could be any reason at all.
I had to use it when I was lightheaded and thought I was going to fall. And I had to, signal that something wrong was going on.
Right.
It could be too much pain.
Or it could be something like, I don't like this. I don't like you anymore. I don't know, that would be a little harsh. But it's completely legitimate. It doesn't matter why the bottom calls red. It says time to stop. Yellow, on the other hand, says you are reaching my threshold, and what you are doing currently, it's right on the edge of being too much. Find something else to do.
Right. Or just check in with me.
Yeah.
I've got something to say.
Yep. So now other people use a little more gradient. They'll have a pain count, like a scale of 1 to 10, but in general, it's those safe words that allow us to communicate, even if it's a scene where I want you to, be really aggressive. And if I say no, I want you to keep going. Then I have to make sure the person does understand the safe word requirement, because then if they do call, they might say, no, please stop, you evil man. But at the point that they say red, it's not a game anymore. It's just time to stop and see what's going on.
Right.
After a red, we might figure out what's going on. We might keep going, but maybe not. Often red means let's take a break.
And if a dungeon, because dungeon play spaces and dungeons have dungeon monitors, so people that go around and make sure everybody's doing things safely. If they hear a red, team stops regardless.
Yeah, they will step in.
Yeah, they will step in and make sure it's done.
Yeah. And that is it's expected that they do that. Mm-hmm. It's a common protocol, and it is, everybody involved is aware of that's what's going to happen. That's called.
Yeah.
Not that I've actually seen. People are usually really respectful in a dungeon. They're knowledgeable. Most people know to take classes and stuff like that. I don't know that I've actually ever heard a red that a dungeon monitor had to step in for, but that's what they're there for. That's the safety part of it.
Yeah, because I could imagine if somebody kind of misunderstands somebody, that could get pretty bad.
Sure, right, absolutely.
Right. So it has to be very clear. That's why it's yellow and red are the major. We don't use made up words most of the time. Right. You'll hear jokes about that, but most people don't because most of us are programmed at this point for red and yellow and what it means.
All right, good. Okay, so now if there's a person listening right now who's in a relationship and they're thinking, boy, this sounds really interesting, and maybe it's really resonating with them and they're like, but I don't know if, their wife or whoever is going to like this. So how might they begin a conversation or find out?
So,
I got two answers too. I know you got one, but I got one.
Go ahead. You do one first then.
So, well, I've got one that's going to be obvious, that's something that we sell. But the other one is do like me and Dan did with the showing of pictures of porn, right? I figured out that my ex-husband would never be interested in this because he was interested in the Playboy model, stand-in model sort of pictures. And I was more interested in the other stuff, right? So, I still brought it up to him. I was hoping it would go a different way. And then with Dan, we shared the pictures, our porn collection, and realized we had the same interest. And you can start conversations that way. Maybe someone will ask you, well, what do you see in this? Why is this a picture that you like? And so you can use it for conversation starters. Mm-hmm. But that's how we started. And I always suggest that because it's kind of fun.
All right. And it's significant to you. Yeah. They see for them. Yeah. But mine is not too dissimilar from that, but have a movie night and just go rent the movie. And maybe it's 50 Shades of Grey, or maybe you want to be a little more circumspect than that. Everybody talks about 50 Shades of Grey, but there's a couple other movies out there. The Secretary comes to mind.
9.5 weeks.
Sure, 9.5 weeks. And there's an older... Well, it's kind of the comedy version of it.
Yeah.
But there's a couple movies that have BDSM themes in it. If you're sitting there with your partner and watching that, and one of you is going, "Ooh, that's kind of interesting," and the other person's going, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's so disgusting," you know that's not a conversation. It's going to be a harder conversation to have. But the other part of it, if you're going to get started in BDSM land, you might as well start off by one of the main things you're going to need anyway is communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're in a significant partnered relationship, and this is it's got nothing to do with BDSM per se, but I can't be in a relationship where I can't look at my partner and say, you know what, I want to talk to you about this thing. Maybe they're not interested in it, and that's perfectly fine, but you should be able to talk to them about it, I would hope. Yeah. A movie, though, something like that can help open the door.
Yeah. Well, the third thing I was going to mention is our Kink Starter cards. So we actually have a deck of cards that we made. It's got a lot of different themes in it, a lot of different implements. a lot of different accessories, things like that. And we had someone that was like, I just don't know if my wife is interested, and I don't know how to bring it up to her. And I'm like, well, take this deck of cards and have her look through it and see what she reacts to. And he did that. And there was a lot of stuff in there that she's like, oh my God, I would never do this. And he's like, well, how about, because we have soft stuff in there too. He's like, well, how about you pick out 3 things that would work for you? And that worked for them. They never moved on to the harder stuff. They stayed with the sensual stuff, but that was absolutely fine. But it was a visual that she could use.
Okay.
Like a tool. So yeah, so there's all kinds of stuff out there that you can use to start conversations.
All right. Well, great. Well, so what I want to just kind of almost wrap up with is just to ask you, where can couples go to get more information? Maybe they need to go to your site. Well, you mentioned one earlier, but where can they go to get more information about this, or get in touch with you guys, or listen to your podcast, or all of that? So what can they do?
Yeah, so you can find out a lot about the dungeons, about the places that we present at, and about those Kickstarter cards Dawn mentioned. Hear us talk more about this type of stuff with our podcast. A couple of different books out there that we put together. One called Living MS, which is more in depth about how we do these power exchange things. All that can be found at eroticawakening.com. And we are not there's nothing. This is not how we make our living, right? This is just what our passion is. So we are absolutely happy to be helpful. If you live in an area that we live near, we can recommend great people to introduce yourselves to, or munches, or events to go to. And fortunately, because we've traveled around a lot, if you're in Illinois, if you're in Chicago or California, or pretty much anywhere in the United
Edmonton
States.
Edmonton and Toronto.
Yeah. We can find places that we would recommend. Go check out, go talk to these people, safe places to go to get started. You don't have to walk into a dungeon as your first thing. You can walk into a more general meeting, a more, like a meet and greet, a support group, round table, things like that. Start a little bit softer. We never recommend that people start off by going to a 600-person event.
Oh, yeah.
It can be overwhelming.
You're like, whoa, talk about deer in the headlights. Oh, my God.
Right.
I can imagine people looking like, what in the world is going on? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
We have contact information for us out on Erotic Awakening. There's a contact form. Please feel free to reach out to us. Any questions, comments, thoughts that you have, we are more than happy to hear and more than happy to reply.
All right. Well, I tell you what, you have taught me so much. I'll tell you that. And I'm sure there are people out there that listening to this, they're like, wow, okay, some questions I wanted to ask, but I just didn't know who to ask and how to get the information. And so there it is. I listened to the Lover's Lounge and I got it. Yeah.
Well, Tina, I have a question for you now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Yeah,
So when it comes to yourself, after hearing this, do you think for yourself, I'm a top, I'm a bottom, or switch, or nah, I'll do a podcast about it, but I don't want to be involved?
I'm going to have to chew on that, Dan. I'm going to have to chew on that. Can't tell you right now, but I'm going to have to chew on that, all right?
Good answer.
Yeah. But thanks so much, you two, for coming on. It has truly been a learning experience for me. And again, like I said, I know there's somebody out there in the audience that probably has learned just as much as I have. So I have enjoyed you guys, and I hope that my listeners, have enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Well,
thank you.
Everybody, I hope that you have enjoyed listening to the Lover's Lounge podcast, where we interview experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. Of course, I am your host, Tina Love, and until next time, peace, and of course, love.